In this week's blog, we talked about the 4 A's. I talk about 3 A's in some of my talks, but I'm going to talk about the 4 A's. One is acknowledge, assess, apologize, and then act. What does that do? Well, those are ways that I deal with a disgruntled patient or person in my life, or actually in any relationship. I always try to acknowledge what's going on. An easy example is perhaps a patient that thinks our fees are too high. Or they may have spoken to somebody else and said, I can get this done cheaper elsewhere. So let's say that happens to you, and it may happen a lot of times. People come in and go, I really don't want to pay this much for this procedure. You're not really worth it, or I can get it done across the street much cheaper. So what do? Well, the first thing I do is I said, well, what is it? I acknowledge it. Is the fee higher than ours? They go, yes. Okay, well, I acknowledge that our fees are higher. And I apologize that that's caused you any concern. I go, but that's what our fees are. Now, here's the important thing. You get to assess. What do? You have a lot of different options. You can not treat the patient. You go, well, this is my fee. Goodbye. Or you can lower your fee immediately. Go, all right, I'll give you 20% off. And they'll say, well, maybe it's too much or maybe it's not too much. Or you can get defensive. Well, I'm worth this. I went to school for many years. I'm the best in the business. They're not as good as I am. But I try never to get defensive, because what happens when you get defensive and you get to be put in a position of you have to make yourself right. And then by making yourself right, you often have to make them wrong. So how do you manage it? How do you manage it when they come after you like that? Or when they just question something that you know is right? So those 4 A's are really important. I acknowledge. First of all, I can't avoid it. I acknowledge immediately, and I will sit with the patient clearly. I go, okay, do you have a moment to talk about this? And they'll say yes or no. Now, oftentimes doctors feel they're too busy to talk to patients about concerns about money. And I don't like to have to talk about money, but I'm comfortable talking about money. And I know what my worth is. I know what I make on an hourly basis. I know what my overhead is on an hourly basis. I know what my materials are on an hourly basis. So an example about money, if someone says, well, I don't want to pay $1,500 for this because I can get it done for $900 across the street. Now I have to think, I have to make an assessment. So I acknowledged it first, now I'm making an assessment. They don't want to pay $1,200, they want to pay $900. Well, what's my hourly rate? Well, let's say my hourly rate is $500. It cost me $500 to open my office, to pay my assistants, to turn on the electricity and the water, and to have the materials in that area. And then what's my material fee? Well, if there's a laboratory fee and it's worth, let's say $300, and my overhead is $500 an hour, I need to make at least $800 to break even. Anything over $800, and then is profit. So I can make a decision. If I want to make $400, I have to charge them $1,200. If I'm comfortable making $100, then charge them $900. But to charge them less than my overhead and my materials, then I'll end up losing money. So this is a little thing that goes on in my mind very quickly. I make that assessment so I know what my fees are, and I know what my overhead is, and I know what my material is. So I can make a decision. So my ego has nothing to do with this. It's my relationship with the patient. So after I do the assessment, and then I apologize that you feel my fees are higher, or I apologize that my fees are higher, then I get to do the very important act. And the act is writing the end of that story. That story can be, I'm sorry, go elsewhere. Then I don't make any money, and I lose the patient, and then they say bad things about the office perhaps. Or I can get defensive, and now we get into a fight. And then I end up giving them a courtesy, and then they're not happy because they don't feel it's enough. Or I say to them, well, what do you think my fee should be? Now, how many of you have ever said to a patient, I'll pay, or I'll let you pay whatever you want? There were some restaurants in New York City that did this for a while, and guess what they found? People would pay more for food and service when they decided on the fee than they would have charged. Now, I've never really done this with a patient. I don't set up my office that way, but sometimes I'll say to a patient, well, what do you think the fee should be? And they get very uncomfortable because patients don't want to tell me what their fee should be. They want me to tell them so that they can make a decision. So sometimes I'll say that, and then we can negotiate and we can have a conversation. So together we can decide. The other thing I could say is, well, is it too expensive? They go, yeah. Well, I never get defensive, but sometimes I'll use humor. And you can do this if you want, but I'll say, well, there's a guy in Brooklyn. He doesn't have a dental license. He's from another country, doesn't speak English very well, but on Sundays he practices in his garage, and you can get this done for $300, not $1,200. And then they realize it's sort of silly. But it's really never about the fee. It's about having trust and confidence in you. And one of the things by acting is you get into a dialogue with the patient where you and the patient together can determine what the fee should be. Do I ever do that? I do. I don't have to do it often, but sometimes I do. And if I have to do it, I want to be comfortable enough to have that conversation with the patient. So in summary, when somebody comes with you with a problem or they're upset, don't fight. You fight, you lose. We learned this a long time ago. If you're going to be in a war, it takes two people to tango. If only one person's fighting, there's no war. So when a patient will come up to me, or a staff member, or a family member, or anybody, I never fight. I don't have road rage. I don't give anybody, any signs on the road. I don't get angry. I just sort of pull back. You pull back, you acknowledge what's happening, and you assess the situation. And then if necessary, I'll immediately apologize. And then I'll give them some options. And those options is where the true power comes from. Don't be a victim, because in those options, you then can take control of a situation and write the end of the story how we want to. You can treat the patient or not treat the patient. You can make $300 for that hour or $100 for that hour, or you can give it away. Now, one of the things by giving it away or reducing your fee or making the patient happy is then that patient becomes a missionary. They go, I had a problem in his office. I spoke with him. He was really kind to me. I'd rather have people saying nice things about me and saying, it's too high, his fees are too much, I went elsewhere. So hopefully that helps you. Remember the 4 A's: acknowledge, assess, apologize, and then act. So I hope you all have a good day. And don't get mad with anybody. Don't get even. Don't be a victim. Just be there for the patient and then have that dialogue. Because in that true communication, that's where the magic happens. It's worked for me. It's worked for my team members. I very rarely have to get into these conversations because they're handled by the team that I work with. And we work together as a team to try to make every one of our patients happy with every visit. We never want anybody to leave disgruntled. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Let me know your thoughts. Be well, everybody. And always be the gift.